This is Weekly Bible Stories, and welcome. I'm Pastor Dave, and it's Weekly Bible Stories with Pastor Dave. This is the story of Ruth, and it's actually what I would call the entire Ruth cycle. It's all the story of ways from the book of Ruth, 1 through 4. This is a synopsis of that found in the Children's Bible, and I'll begin. Naomi was moving back to Bethlehem. Her husband and sons had died, and she wanted to go home. But she begged her beloved daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, to stay behind, for she was penniless and life would be hard. Orpah and Ruth loved Naomi dearly and did not want to stay behind. But finally, Orpah agreed to go home. But Ruth was loyal and said, "Don't ask me to leave. I will go wherever you go, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." And so it was that Ruth and Naomi came to Bethlehem. Soon they had no food left, and brave Ruth went out into the fields where the workers were harvesting the crops. And she asked the owner if she could pick up the barley that his workers had left. The man was Boaz, and he kindly let Ruth work in his fields and told his servants to share their food with her. When Ruth returned with a full basket of food, Naomi knew that the Lord was looking after them, for Boaz was a relation of hers. And in time, Ruth married him, and they had a son named Obed. And there was no happier woman in the whole of Bethlehem than Naomi. That would be the story of Ruth.
That's just a great, happy story, Pastor.
Mm-hmm. It is a happy story. I guess at several levels, it's happy because it's a love story. You don't have tons of love stories in the Bible, so it's kind of like a Hallmark movie. But it's kind of one of those feel-good stories. Ruth was from Moab, and so she wasn't an Israelite, but Naomi had went to Moab because there was a famine in Israel. While she was in Moab, she lost her husband, and she lost her two sons. And then there was a famine in Moab, and so she says, "I'm going to go home." And Naomi she says when she arrives in Bethlehem, and interestingly in the scripture account, it says they arrive at the beginning of the barley harvest. And they recognize her, small town. Bethlehem is a little town. And they say, "Oh, it's Naomi. She's come back." And "Don't call me Naomi, call me bitter, because of all these horrible things that have happened to me." Ruth, again, is loyal to her and stays with her, even though she tries to send her away. You get this impression that Naomi wants to go to Bethlehem to kind of sulk, to feel self-pity, to feel bad about her life. And it isn't to say that there aren't bad things that have happened to her. There have. But she kind of wants to be alone and just kind of live out her days in misery. And Ruth just kind of sticks with her and won't let her do that. And Ruth is marked, if there was something that designated her. What is it about her that is the most important thing? It is her kindness and her servanthood. That when they need food, Ruth goes out, and the practice in ancient Israel was that after the farmers had went over the field once, then gleaners, poor people, were allowed to come in after them and to glean, to pick up what was left. And so Ruth does that. So Ruth gets the food. She goes home and she prepares the food. I mean, she could have got home and said, "Now, Naomi, you prepare it. I'm tired. I've been working all day." But she's just endlessly kind. And for whatever reason, Boaz notices that. He notices, it could be that he notices the beauty of her person, of her face and her body. But I think it's also that he notices and is smart enough to notice the beauty of her soul. And he, again, small town, he knows the story. And eventually they fall in love and get married and have a son. And their son's name is Obed, which means, interestingly enough, servant. Obed then has a son, and his son's name is Jesse. And Jesse has a son whose name is David, who becomes the king of Israel. And ultimately, that's part of the line of Christ. That Ruth is part of the line of Christ from David, but from Ruth. And it's kind of that idea of generosity and kindness. Sometimes we do that. We say, well, what good does it do to be generous and kind and serving, to help? What good does it do to help other people and to serve them, because you don't get anything from it. No good deed goes unpunished, etc., etc. But in this story, ultimately, maybe not immediately, but ultimately, it does pay off in dividends. It pays off because there's probably a little bit of Ruth in David. And there's probably a little bit of Ruth in Jesus. And for that, that makes it a good story.
It does make it a good story. Thanks, Pastor.